Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Laura Rotter of True Abundance Advisors. I know everyone on the call. And I'm here together, you may not know everyone else, with Kathy Rosenthal, an estate planning attorney with Rosenthal and Markowitz, and someone I know for quite a long time. And Heidi Weiss, who's a licensed social worker, health advocate, and educator. And I know Heidi since we planned this workshop before. And I'm so glad that we're finally moving ahead and doing it specifically today, which is 2 days ahead of National Healthcare Decisions Day on April 16th. So I'm going to start this workshop off with a story because I was contacted by a friend. I'm going to call her Susan. It's a good name. And she specifically contacted me because she got the invitation to this workshop and she wanted to share her story so that I could share it with you. So Susan married Steve, and it was a second marriage for both of them. So one of the first things they did, they met with a financial planner because they wanted to merge their finances and they wanted to be comfortable that they knew what they were doing and they were guided in their decision making. And that financial planner said, meet with an estate planning attorney. And so they put a will in place and understood how their respective estates would pass. They each had children from previous marriages. They named each other their respective healthcare proxies. And they put a living will in place. And as Susan described this to me, it was a boilerplate living will. It said something to the effect of no heroic measures would be taken, on each other's part if, and I wrote down the language, if they were not expected to have a meaningful life after the decision was made. And so they signed this document and they felt very comfortable that everything was in place when Steve needed open heart surgery. And you can imagine, since I'm telling you this story, that the surgery didn't go well. And Steve was in the ICU, unconscious, and Susan was left to make life and death decisions for Steve. And she was questioning the doctors and got the information. In a best case, Steve would be expected to recover maybe 80% of his functioning after months and months of rehab. And Susan was like, Steve, would that be a meaningful life to you? What did you mean? And she was so frustrated that they had not had this discussion beforehand, that they had not thought about, what if you're in a coma? What if you're expected to have severe permanent brain damage? What kind of decisions do you want me to make? What does meaningful mean to you? And so we know that these aren't easy discussions to have, and that's why most of us never have them. And so I'd like to believe that the fact that you're all here is an indication that you are ready to have this discussion with your loved ones, that you are ready to take the next step so that the decision makers you choose, the people you name in your healthcare proxy, know how you feel about what's quality of life to you. And I also want to start this workshop by saying that how you feel today very likely will be different than how you feel 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Your thoughts will change, and that's perfectly normal. But the most important thing is to communicate your thoughts and your feelings so that decision-making will be less uncertain if and when the time comes. So before we delve into the content, I want to go over a couple of ground rules. Kathy had mentioned this earlier. I wrote down, be sure to have a pen and pencil. In this digital age, that might be an Apple Pencil and an iPad. It might be your keyboard to take notes, but we encourage you to take notes throughout. Thank you, Andrea and Daniel and Vicki. At the same time, we will be sending up a follow-up document that, Kathy graciously put together for us, and Heidi will also be sharing links with some of the resources that she mentions during her part of the presentation. I can see everyone on screen. I don't know about Kathy's iPad, so we encourage you to ask questions throughout. You don't need to wait until the end, just by raising your hand, or if for any reason it's not comfortable to ask questions in a group, or the technology's not working, there's a chat box at the bottom that you can put questions in as well. And finally, I just want to set the intention for this to be a safe space, so that if anyone does ask a question that involves personal details or stories, that that privacy be respected. Of course, outside of this workshop, I'd like to believe that goes without saying, but even inside this workshop, if somebody shares a personal detail, please don't ask follow-up questions about that. I'm going to start off with some financial considerations for advanced care planning, but please know that that is not the focus of this workshop. But while I'm here, I figured I'd share. Starting off with long-term care costs. Long-term care costs, I'm defining as care that you may need as you age that is not covered by health insurance. It's not covered by private health insurance, and it's not covered by Medicare. So what are these long-term care needs? They're defined as activities of daily living. You may, and many of us frankly have experienced this with aging parents, get to a point in your life where you can't bathe yourself. You can't dress yourself. You can't feed yourself. You're going to need help with these activities. And right now, the way our system is set up, that's not paid for by health insurance, and that's not paid for by Medicare. It is paid for by Medicaid, but in order to qualify for Medicaid, you need to have a small amount of income and a small amount of assets. There is an entire business set up around what's known as Medicaid planning, and that is not the focus of this workshop. You can purchase, and I actively encourage my clients to purchase long-term care insurance to at least cover a portion of your long-term care costs. There are two ways of purchasing long-term care insurance: standalone. And I want to start by saying that the ideal age to think about purchasing long-term care insurance is 50s, early 60s. Premiums are lower when you're that age. And frankly, you have less of a risk of already having healthcare issues that will make it difficult, if not impossible, to put long-term care insurance in place. And you can also purchase this through a hybrid policy, which covers both life and can be used towards long-term care insurance. Just know that the cost of those policies is at least 2 times, if not 3 times, greater than just a standalone long-term care insurance policy. But I do want to let you know, I looked this up because I know Genworth updates the cost of long-term care annually, and I put in my zip code. I'm in White Plains, New York, a commuting suburb of New York City, right? One of the most expensive areas in the country. And if, for example, my children determined I needed long-term care now and wanted me to be in a private room in a nursing care facility, that cost is upwards of $150,000 a year in the New York area. Now, the cost of care can vary greatly. You may be lucky enough to be able to stay home, and then home health aides are paid for. That could be cheaper. You could be in a nursing facility. Just know it's very expensive, and it's getting more expensive. And so if you do not fund it through insurance, please work with a planner to understand, how are you going to fund it? Do you have the resources? And also, if you have the resources and you're someone who ideally leaves a portion of your estate to your children, that may be another reason to put some insurance in place so that you're not eating into your estate and forcing them to make decisions at the end of your life. Another thing that I want to point out is when you do meet with an estate planning attorney and put a will in place, I am often surprised. Many of my clients, the bulk of their assets are in their retirement assets. Their 401k assets, an IRA was put in place. Well, when you put those retirement plans in place, you're specifically asked, what beneficiary or beneficiaries do you want to name? Then you meet with your estate planning attorney and you say, I want this much to go to Uncle Joe and this much to go to Aunt Alice. And you might be surprised that Uncle Joe and Aunt Alice aren't getting much because you didn't name them as beneficiaries on your retirement account. And so it's something to be aware of, not only be aware of, but make sure to be checking your beneficiaries on a regular basis. Life changes. People you intended to leave money to may unexpectedly pass before you. You may have a change in marital status. So just know what is often a large part of your asset base, how have you set those up to pass, and make sure that that's in keeping with how you imagine your estate is going to pass when you're no longer here. And Elaine, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Okay.
I wanted to ask, you hit on something that happened to me. I did name someone in my will and they did pass away 2 years ago. So I never changed that, but I had it to leave something to my daughter. And God forbid if my daughter and I went, let's say at the same time in a plane crash or something, what would happen then? So I put somebody else and he passed away. So that was only in case generationally, so I don't know if I should go back and change that or just leave it.
Kathy, you want to answer that?
Yeah, and I actually have an answer for you, which is, I don't know the answer because what it requires is reading your entire will, because if your will says I give $5,000 to A, but A dies before me than to B, and B also dies before me, there may be some other paragraph in there that governs what happens if both A and B die before you. So the actual chain of money is going to depend on what your whole will says. But it's probably a good idea to reread your will I tell people every 4 or 5 years, and whenever there's been a major life event, retirement, a birth, a death, because maybe there's other things in there you want to change also, and deal with everything at the same time.
Right.
Right. So that question is unfortunately too specific for this group because it involves your personal documents. Sorry.
Right. No, I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. And I'm going to make my final comment before I do introduce Kathy in more detail and hand it over to her. And that is, there's a number of boilerplate documents one puts in place, and a power of attorney is something else to put in place. Specifically, who would you want to be in charge of your financial decisions and have access to your bank accounts if you were to be incapacitated? Who do you want and trust with paying your bills, filing your insurance claims, maybe hiring healthcare aides? It would not be in place until that moment when you are incapacitated, but it is important. Oh, I'm sorry. And I'm going to pass it to Kathy in more detail, but it's important to also think about that at the same time if you're thinking about who do you want to be in charge of healthcare decisions. Yes, Bernice.
Laura, if you haven't done that yet and something happens, isn't your spouse the one who gets to make all those decisions legally? Or I see Kathy shaking her head, so I suppose that's wrong.
Not well. Yeah, all right. So do you want to introduce me I'll just.
I'm going to introduce Kathy.
Okay.
Thanks.
It's a great question.
Kathy was admitted to practice law in the state of New York, and she's been admitted there since 1978. And she's a partner in Rosenthal and Markowitz since January 2001, concentrating in the areas, not surprisingly, of estate planning and estate settlement, trust and will drafting, elder law planning, and residential real estate transactions. And she'd like you to know that she works with single people, married people, and non-married couples. I cede the floor.
Thank you. All right. So I actually wrote up 3 pages of notes just to make sure that I would stick to a topic and not go too long, but I can't resist going out of order to answer Bernice's question. So that's okay. And I want to make one comment about what Laura said.
Thank you.
So with regard to powers of attorney, which are not on the table for today and which would make a whole other separate terrific topic, powers of attorney is it's a signed form. Yes, there is a boilerplate form. It is terrible. Do not use it. Do not get, I get hives when I even think about it. Do not go to the internet and download a form. I will tell you why. First of all, because powers of attorney are different one state from another, and they have changed over time. And if you just go mucking around on the internet and find a power of attorney form, you're not necessarily sure it is the form, the latest form, and that it is the New York State form. So that's number one, the form itself. Number two, signing it is not easy. It's got all sorts of little wrinkly things that have to be done to it. It's not user-friendly. And the third part is in fact, it is not boilerplate. We customize it considerably to add powers that we think should be needed, are important powers. The other problem with a power of attorney is it is effective as soon as it is signed. Can I say that again? It is effective the day you sign it. Your agent can go and do stuff for you on your behalf. All the agent needs is the signed form. Whether it's not a form which is only effective in the future upon your incompetence. Your healthcare proxy is, but your power of attorney is not. So if you name somebody to be your agent on your power of attorney and you hand it over, number one, if you change your mind and you want to revoke it, you've got to get it back and hope that that person will give it back to you, or you can at least revoke it in a way that will supersede that old one. And the other thing is somebody could just take your power of attorney and go run amok with it right now, which is always my fear with these forms. So it is not a form that is only effective in the future. As to Bernice's question about if you don't have, you said if you don't have this paperwork, I'm not sure if you were talking directly about the healthcare proxy documents or the power of attorney documents, but I'll tell you in neither case, in New York State, there is nobody, except under a very limited circumstance, where somebody just can come in and make decisions for you. And there's certainly nobody who can sign your financial paperwork without you. Even if you have a joint brokerage account in New York State, both of you are supposed to, well, be approving everything that goes on. And supposedly neither person can act to close out the account without the other. You can put stuff in, you can write checks out of it, but you really need both people to close it out. Same thing if you own a house together as husband and wife or joint tenants, and one of you wants to sell, you both must sign the deed, and the one person can sign on behalf of the other with a correctly signed power of attorney, not the form that you're going to download from the internet. That doesn't do real estate well enough. The title company will really not like that form. So did that answer your question, Bernice?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, great. Okay, so now I have good news and I have bad news, which is the way I usually start this. And the bad news is that there is so much to talk about that if I had the whole hour all to myself, I couldn't even cover everything that should be covered with healthcare proxies. The good news is you've got a great panel here, and at least in the time we have, we'll cover a lot of important information, and we'll hopefully get you thinking about, your own healthcare decision-making and how to start the conversation with the people who you want to make your decisions for you if you can't make them for yourself. So our goal here is more to be a tease, but there's a lot of information we're going to give you. And then I wrote up an outline, a primer, I think I called it, a handout. And Laura's going to send that around to everybody. And that's just got lots more information written down. So if you can't write fast, it's okay. So the first thing about healthcare documents is there's a generic term for them, and they're called advanced healthcare directives. And in New York State, we have 3 different healthcare directives. We have healthcare proxies, we have HIPAA authorizations, and we have living wills. Okay, they each have a different purpose. They're each signed in a different format. You give them to different people. They look different. So we got 3 different things I want to mention very briefly. And then I'm going to go into more detail. So the first thing is a healthcare proxy. That's actually a statutory form. It's a New York State public health law form. It has to be signed in accordance with a certain formality. It's got to have certain magic words in it. It's got to be dated. A healthcare proxy form is not valid unless it's a dated form. I mean, you wouldn't know that, right? It's got to be witnessed. The function of a healthcare proxy is who will make my decisions for me if I cannot make them for myself. If I'm competent, I can speak for myself. I get to make my own decisions, even if they're stupid decisions, even if they're not rational decisions, I can still make my own healthcare decisions for myself. A HIPAA authorization, as you all know, when you sign those hard papers, when you go to the doctor, it says, we are not permitted to disclose anything to anybody ever again, go away. We're not even going to tell you, but go away. A HIPAA authorization is your written consent to let certain people look at your healthcare information. They can't make decisions, but they can gather your healthcare information. Like if I want to send my husband to the doctor to pick up x-rays, which actually nobody picks up x-rays anymore, but if I wanted to, he could do that for me. So that's a HIPAA authorization. And that could be different people than your healthcare proxy, but it could be the same people. It doesn't matter. Actually, I had a client had an adult person who had two sons, and this was in the old days when you really had to do a lot of work to do your medical insurance paperwork. And it was before Medicare for these people, and it was a pain in the neck. Both of their sons were their healthcare proxies, one after the other, but they wouldn't do the healthcare. They refused to do insurance forms. They wouldn't do it. The daughter-in-law did all the healthcare paperwork for them. So they had to name her as a HIPAA agent so she could talk to the doctors to get the paperwork and talk to the insurance companies, but they didn't want her making decisions, although she was the smartest of all of them, but the sons were the healthcare agents. The third document is called a living will. And a living will is not a will. It has nothing to do with disposing of your property when you die. A living will is a document by which you get to say to your agents, to the world, what kind of care you do and you do not want. It doesn't even have to be in writing. It's your final word on what you do and you do not want. And it's revocable. All these documents are revocable. You change your mind, you don't like them, you rip them up, you start again. Once you've signed it, in order to change it, you either have to rip it up, or you can't just write on a signed document and say, oh, look, I've made these changes. It doesn't quite work like that. But actually with the living will, you probably could, because it's not a form, it's not a statutory document. It's a private document. It's your conversation with your agents, your kids, because here's the problem. And I know I'm going out of order. I'm doing living wills first, but I find that if you say to your kids, who are probably fairly young, and you are all fairly young, son, I want to talk to you about what kind of care I want if I'm dying, or if I've had a stroke, or I'm in a coma, or I'm in a car accident. And what's your son going to say to you? Ma, you're fine. We're not going to talk about it. You're too young. Because he doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to know if you're in diapers or you've got an aid 24/7. He's grossed out. He doesn't want to hear it. So at least if you put it on a piece of paper and you write down what you want and you don't want, it provides a lot of comfort level to your kids who are going to, or whoever your loved one is, who's going to have to make these decisions. That's why I like them. If you want treatment to stop at a certain point and you want the plug pulled, that's how we tend to discuss this. It helps your especially your kids, your spouse, same age, going to understand, close. But the kids, they don't get that. And they're going to feel, they might. I know kids who don't, but there are kids who might feel guilty about, well, maybe I should do one more treatment, one more test, one more course of medication. It's a comfort level to the people who have to make decisions. If it's in writing and it says, what we call it is enough is enough. Now, your healthcare proxy does not, I'm sorry, your living will does not have to say enough is enough. I have done them where they say, treat, treat, treat. Do every test known to man, every drug known to man. You just keep me plugged in forever and ever. And when my body goes, it goes. I have clients like that. I have one who is poor, but she wants, I got another one who's rich and he can afford it, and they'll figure it out. But it's a helpful document. If you can't have the conversation, it's a helpful document to have. I'm going to flip back to the healthcare proxy. So the function of the healthcare proxy is to say who should make my decisions for me. How do you pick a healthcare agent? Well, you should pick the kid, not the kid who lives closest, not the kid who's the smartest. I think you should pick the kid who's going to do what you want to have done or not done. That's the kid or the loved one or the friend, could be a friend, who should be your healthcare agent. In New York State, you can only have one at a time. So your form might say, if A can't do it, then B. If B can't do it, then C. That's fine. But you can't have two because then you know what's going to happen. They're going to disagree, and one's going to tell the doctor something like, keep it plugged in forever. And the other one's going to say, unplug. And then the doctor's going to not know what to do. The healthcare proxy just says who. Some healthcare proxy forms, and if you go back and look at your forms that you've signed already, because I'm sure you've been very diligent and you've done these, it may have included in it a living will. It may have lots of paragraphs that say what you want. If that is what it says, I would strongly urge you to redo a healthcare proxy and separate out the two functions, the who from the what. Because if you walk into an emergency room with a document that's 4 pages long, that has all this story in it and all these, well, maybe if this, but maybe if the other thing, you're going to paralyze them in the emergency room. And what are they going to do? Every test known to man, every procedure known to man, they're going to plug you in and keep you plugged in, even in a persistent vegetative state, because they're not going to read all those words in the emergency room. They're going to send this piece of paper up to legal, who's going to send it up to the ethics committee, who's going to sit on it because they don't want to decide. They're going to hope you just die in the meantime, and that'll solve the problem. Try to separate out the two functions, the two documents, if you can. The living will is private. It's meant for your agents. The healthcare proxy is your public document. You take it with you. In fact, it's on my list of things because now I know I'm running out of time. Here's what I suggest you do with your healthcare proxy. After you've signed it, you give a photocopy, because you never have to show the original. You give a photocopy to each of your agents so that they have it. You give photocopies to your doctors so that they know what you've got. And then, because of your children will lose their papers and your spouse will lose papers, and the last thing you're going to do when you're rushing off to the emergency room or when you get hit by a car on the street is think you've got your healthcare proxy in your pocket. Take a picture with your very smartphone of your healthcare proxy, and you will always have your picture of your healthcare proxy in your photos when you need it. And remind your children to do the same thing. That's what I have done, because it's just easier. Or take a picture or scan it and email it to yourself and to your loved ones. At least then it's in your email, and it might, along with the 4,000 pieces of spam that you have, you might be able to find it back again. But the photos, I think, are an easier resource to find than email. I'm going to have another suggestion about your healthcare proxy, about who you're going to name. The function of the healthcare proxy is to get you treatment. decide what tests you need, what kind of hospitalization you need, what kind of process. If you have a power of attorney, remember, it's your power of attorney agent who's going to be writing the checks. It's your healthcare agent who's going to be deciding what you need. My suggestion is if you have two children and they do not get along, do not divide the work and give your son the power of attorney and your daughter the healthcare proxy, because in extreme, people say, oh, well, if it's an emergency, they'll get along, they'll talk to each other. No, they won't. It's just going to make it, it could just make it worse. The drama, the tension, the near death. So you have to make sure that your agents are coordinated and will work and play nicely with each other. Your power of attorney agent and your healthcare agent. Name the same person to do both. Then you have lost all control, but at least that way you've got, you know that the person who's got your healthcare interest in your best interests in heart will also be able to afford to pay for it. Very important. If you don't name a healthcare agent, there's nobody who in New York State, we don't have what's called substituted decision-making, except if you're in a hospital situation. And then the hospital has a list of people, there's a statute, a priority of who can make your healthcare decisions for you if you've not signed a healthcare proxy. I don't know that you always want to, well, first of all, you could have emergencies not in a hospital, so that this statute would not apply, but you may not like that order of who the state thinks should be making your healthcare decisions for you. So it's not, I don't like the idea of relying on the statute to name a healthcare agent. Better, you should just name the healthcare agent yourself. It's the person you want, then the next person you want. So you're in control of your own decision-making. Now, I could talk for another, you just wind me up and I'll keep going, but I think I'd like Heidi to have some, she's got great input on this one. And then we all will have time for questions afterwards. So I'm going to do a little abbreviated introduction of Heidi. Okay. She's a licensed social worker. I've got to read this because it's got good stuff in it. She's a healthcare advocate and educator who applies a palliative lens, and she'll explain that if you don't know, to the provision of supportive services to individuals and family members facing serious, chronic, debilitating, and life-limiting illness. She focuses on the impact of illness on the impact of illness on emotional well-being, community resources, initiating complex conversations, and supportive counseling, which is really what we one of the primary focuses of today. She's a coordinator of addressing Alzheimer's at WJCS. She sits on the advisory board of the Montefiore Center for the Aging Brain. I think rather than read this, because she's so credentialed, I think you'd rather just listen to her. So I'm going to turn this over to Heidi.
Well, welcome everybody. And more than credentialed, I'm just really, really busy. That's what it comes down to. But welcome, I'm glad you showed up today because these are very important pieces of information for everybody to have. And today I will focus on the healthcare proxy, but not what Kathy has already shared with you, but what goes into filling out this document and what are the real important issues for that living will, which ultimately begins with a conversation. The goal of even addressing this kind of workshop is to improve the way and the experience that families may have when one day it is likely, very likely, that a loved one will be diagnosed with a very serious or life-limiting illness. You know, God willing, it's not until way, way down the road, but it happens. And it happens when we don't expect things too, like when we have accidents. I mean, we're not always prepared when it's an accident. So the whole purpose of preparing and planning in advance, like we are talking about today, is really to avoid the crisis of not having done this sooner, if God forbid something does happen. So getting your finances in order, getting your legal paperwork in order, and getting your healthcare decision-making paperwork in order is essential in all fairness to your family and loved ones before there's a crisis. This way you can talk about it, you can change your mind, you can process, and that's the essence of all of this. really sharing what you know about yourself with those you love and those you're choosing to make decisions for you, to make them in the way you would want them, as though they were standing in your shoes. And that's what we say about a healthcare agent. That person should know your decisions and your choices well enough to be that person who stands in your shoes and make them as you would for yourself. So the purpose of a document itself is to extend you as the principal. You are the principal, the person signing, having that, who owns the document. The agent is the person you assign the tasks to. And the document is the healthcare proxy. Often those terms get interchanged and the proxy becomes the agent. So just so you know, the agent is the one who will execute your wishes. The proxy is your document. You are the principal. That means you make all the decisions. And you do that until the point that you have been determined to not have capacity to make them for yourself. And that is determined by two psychiatrists. Someone doesn't come along and say, you know, they didn't know who the president was today. They can't make any decisions. That's not how it goes. So there will be a true psych evaluation to determine your capacity, which is different than competency. So we don't want to confuse the two. And the healthcare proxy is what's called, has springing authority. It is only initiated when you cannot make the decisions. And that's when the agent steps in. So it wouldn't be, if you and your agent had a fight and you had to go to the doctor, and the agent can't say to the doctor, you know what, don't give her anything anymore. First of all, that person should not be your agent. And second of all, that's not true. So it only is initiated when you can no longer make those decisions for yourself. So the principal, the person must be in a decision-making capacity to sign, to appoint and sign a healthcare proxy. So that's important. And that's why we often urge you to do it earlier in your life as opposed to later. I actually do these workshops on college campuses because at 18, and many of you I'm sure have adult children or even adult grandchildren at this point, at 18, you are emancipated from your parents regarding all healthcare decisions. You make your own. Your parents will not have the authority without your permission to make them for you. So, as with all other people, you want to make sure that your child has a healthcare proxy as well. Important when they go off to college. It should come in a college packet, but it doesn't. Maybe we can change that. And with few exceptions, you can appoint just about anybody to be your proxy. It doesn't have to be your spouse. It doesn't have to be your oldest child. It doesn't have to be the one who's the doctor in the family. You can appoint a friend, a cousin, the receptionist at the dentist's office if she knows you well enough and you've had these conversations and that's who you trust. That's who can be your healthcare agent. The essence of the healthcare proxy, which in New York State looks like this if you get it from the government. It doesn't have this. It's a healthcare proxy. The one from New York State has really good frequently asked questions sections, so that, and it goes from point to point on the document itself, which in New York is so wonderful. It's a simple 2-page document. If you live or have a home in another state, you might want to check with that other state because not all states accept everyone's or anyone else's healthcare proxy. So if you have a place in Florida or Arizona or out in California, or a second home where your kids live in Maryland, you will want to make sure that you investigate whether your New York State healthcare proxy will be accepted there, and if not, to do another healthcare proxy for that state specifically. If you regain capacity to make decisions for yourself, so I think Kathy suggested, or Laura suggested that this husband was going in for surgery. Steve, I think we called him. Steve was going in for surgery. So while Steve is under anesthesia, Steve has full capacity while he's well. We're doing a different Steve. He's not that sick. Steve has full capacity before he goes in for the surgery. He's having his tonsils out. He's an adult who has his tonsils out. But he will be under anesthesia. And while he's under anesthesia, he does not have capacity to make a healthcare decision. So if while they're looking at his tonsils, they see that there is a tumor and they need to know what to do. Well, Steve's wife, Susie, already is the healthcare proxy. She has her documentation. She can say to the doctor when he comes out, we found this, we went in for the tonsils, we found this, what would you like us to do? She's going to say, I'm going to be Susie and say, take that out, please, and then biopsy it. Without a healthcare proxy, that doctor would not be sure if he can even think to take it out while Steve is under the anesthesia, and he may have to come out of the anesthesia, ask Steve, and that becomes a whole new procedure. That's another reason to have a healthcare proxy and an agent you trust to make those decisions. And the essence of this document that I showed you is, as Kathy suggested, you sign it, and we will go through how that is completed. But the essence is the conversations you have with your agents, both your primary and an alternate that you pick. You can choose an alternate, not a secondary, but an alternate. And that person is contacted only if your primary cannot be reached when a decision needs to be made. So these are two important people that you will need to ensure know what you want. And I think it was Laura who said, so today you know what you want, and today you're fairly healthy. So, you know, you're good. You can say it's really not going to be so bad. We've had our little talk. 10 years from now, all of a sudden you develop a little congestive heart failure. Your agents are going to want to know that, and their agents are going to need to know a little bit of what does that mean? What is it like for you? What do you want us to do if that gets to be very serious? You know, with congestive heart failure, it could be really challenging to breathe. You have pressure on your chest. It has a limitation to how long one can live with it. You can't live forever with it. That's the kind of stuff that you want to talk about with the principal and the agents need to talk about, the depth of that. And that becomes what Kathy is talking about in the living will. You can document all of those conversations and update all of those conversations on new documents because nobody wants to see the crossing outs. But that becomes what we also call clear and convincing evidence for this agent to make this decision for you. This is what you've explained to us. This is how you wrote it down. We know, and this is what we want to tell the doctor. That gives much comfort and minimum crises for the people who have to make those decisions for you. So on the proxy itself, it's really very basic. It doesn't ask for a lot of specific information. It asks your name and who you're appointing, who your alternate agents is. You must give contact information because how else are they going to get a hold of them? You know, you can't, and an address isn't really contact information. An email, a phone number, a home phone and a cell phone, that'll be the way to reach them. There is a space where you can invoke an expiration date. So by a show of hands, you can take yourselves off mute. We're going to do this interactionally. Take yourselves off mute.
Okay.
Why would you put an expiration date?
Kind of to force yourself to review it and update it.
I've never heard that as a strategy, but that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you put an expiration date?
Because I'm unlikely to review it and make sure.
Because you want it to be in effect when you need it to be in effect.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Because if you put an expiration date on it and you forget what the or stop thinking about it, and that expiration date comes and goes, is this still a valid document?
No.
So we don't put expiration dates on them. If Andrea, you can be as diligent as you sound like you can be to make that your trigger for a reminder to review it. But just remember, if you put that expiration date, you can't cross it out.
I'm convinced it will be on.
If I can, some people might be thinking, well, I'm going to put in an expiration date, perhaps, because I'm about to get divorced from my spouse. And I don't want my spouse to be able to make these decisions for me after our divorce. because he probably doesn't like me and will probably not do enough treating after our divorce. He's paying me alimony, it's a bad plan. I just so you know, as a matter of law in New York State, if you have named your spouse as your agent, and if you get a divorce, your spouse is automatically disqualified as a matter of law from being your agent. Just so you know, you don't have to worry about having one of these with your now ex-spouse as your agent.
That will bring so much relief to so many.
I'm sure. So instead you move down to the doctors will move to the next agent. So
you put your identification, you do have to sign it. There is a place, if you haven't put it on your driver's license and you want to consider for organ or tissue donation, you can think about it. There's no obligation. And then there's a place where it says, I think it's here. I'm going to read. I direct my healthcare agent to make healthcare decisions according to my wishes and limitations as he or she knows or as stated below. So you can put in very specified instructions. What happens if you change your mind? You can take yourselves off mute. I don't care if you're drinking tea or whatever. It's okay.
You do a
What
new
happens if you
document.
write something very specific on your healthcare proxy document and you change your mind?
Could redo it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to redo the whole thing.
Which means you will have to have new witnesses. You will have to ensure that your agent is still willing to do this if you're making more copies. By law, there is a phrase that is accepted on there that really covers this because, and let me give you that, and then I will explain why it's that particular sentence. It's my agents, plural. So in case your alternate needs to be brought in. My agents know my wishes for artificial nutrition and hydration. And the reason we use that is because when this document was created, that was the clarifying reason for somebody through Medicare actually required us to do that. So it was really focused on someone to decide whether you will or will not have a peg tube for feeding or be injected with various drugs for treatment. That covers all of that. And you don't have to specify anything because you've already told your agents. You've had these conversations over and over. You've made it clear in your living will. So that's why nobody else needs to know what else is specific. Your witnesses, you'll need 2 witnesses. They cannot be your agents. They have to be 18 or older. And the dates they sign have to line up with your date.
sounds so obvious. Yes.
I know, but it's
Yeah, right.
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 So we're not going to put any limitations on this, and you're going to make sure your dates line up. Yes, Andrea.
Okay, about dates lining up. I
Yeah.
have 2 kids. They live in one in New York, one in Oregon. How do I get her date to line up? I mean, we're scanning copies of the document. Or...
I'm going to let Kathy answer that.
Because they're not signing it as witnesses because they're probably your agents. It's not your agents
Right.
who sign it. It's your witnesses who sign it.
Witnesses. Okay.
The people in the room with you who are watching you sign it.
Okay.
Right.
That's whose date Heidi's talking about.
Okay.
Right. So it can't be your agents. It cannot be a treating physician.
Right.
And
Your
not
agent can't be your treating
your
physician.
treating physician. Right. So if you're in current treatment with a doctor, that doctor cannot be your healthcare agent. Any questions so far? So it's really the goal of all of this today is to help you build confidence and a little expertise to enable yourself to sit down with your family members and talk about all of these issues and all of these documents, especially when we get to the healthcare proxy, what your thoughts are, what your values are, particularly about the quality of your life, and what your wishes are, so that they know in the event of B is going to be the decision, or in the event of C, D is going to be the decision. And some of those decisions will be based upon things like, I'm going to give you an example from a card game that you can get online. I will give Laura the resource. It's called gowish.org. It's a card game that comes in a regular card package, 36 cards. And on those cards, there are things that are stated such as, I want to be free from anxiety. I want to be free from pain. I want to be able to talk about what scares me. I want to die at home. I don't want to die at home. And it's those particulars, specifics that you really have to dig deep about to know, so that your agents will make those decisions that would be your decisions. Were you able to make them for yourselves? You know, I did this with about 50 people, 20% were clergy, and one of the cards says to meet with clergy or chaplain. Not one of the clergy picked that card. I was amazed, because it was more important to them to have those other things, to have a trusted doctor or nurse, to not die alone. That's really important to some people. I held my father-in-law's hand until my husband and I could hand off, and he would hold his hand until his last breath, because he was afraid to die alone. And the last thing we wanted him to be was afraid. So when you know you can be brave, your children can be brave, your spouse can be brave, braver, because they know this is what you want. And that's the essence of a healthcare proxy and the conversations. Like Kathy, this is an hour, at least in and of itself, maybe longer. But it's important to remember that what you know, and just remember, and you have to keep going back to the conversations, because today you have one set of feelings and values and thoughts. 10 years from now, another set. After 3 diagnoses and 8 rounds of treatment, you definitely have a particular mindset about what it is you want going forward. So we can always come back and talk about more about this, and Laura, you'll help us know what to do with that. The only other form I just want to introduce to you, which you may see in your files, either at your doctor's office or at the hospital if you're admitted, is called a MOLST. MOLST. It stands for Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. This is one of those documents. This is what we call a physician-driven document. Your healthcare proxy is not a physician-driven document. It is a patient-driven document. This is put into effect when there is a serious illness or a serious medical situation. And the doctor should be sitting with you to talk about your options for treatment. Let's see what the various topics are. This is for treatment guidelines. So it's if you want intubation, to have a tube put down for breathing or not. And that's for your choice. On a MOLST, you always have the opportunity to try any of the interventions. If it's not working, if you're not getting the result, if your agents recognize that they are not getting the result that you wanted for your life, then they can revoke the decision. They don't have to repeat that decision. You can take a trial of it and give it a 2 weeks, a 3 weeks. This is a malleable document in that sense, that it gives you those options.
It's almost like it sounds to me like it's like a living will.
Right. Right. Except it's an active in-action document that you work with the physicians to reevaluate. It is a document that needs to be medically reevaluated by your physician every 90 days. Because at that point, by 90 days, you might have a very different opinion of what you want next.
It's really for when you're already ill, as opposed
Yes.
to anticipating.
Yes, right. You will not have one in your file if you do not have a serious illness. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And can I take
Yes.
this opportunity to tell people about a DNR,
Oh, yes.
right? A do not resuscitate or a do not intubate, which is also, people come to me and they say, I want a healthcare proxy and a living will, and I want a DNR. I say, no, you probably don't, because it's not a standard document that we do as part of an estate plan, because it's a document that's also signed in extremis. And if I were to do one in my office with a nice, healthy person, it wouldn't be valid at the last minute, because they're always reevaluated in the extreme emergency situation, a DNR. And if you sign a healthcare proxy, your agent has the authority under law to sign a DNR for you. So if your agent is going to have that power, you really better be talking to somebody to say, yes, I do want a DNR. The other thing we talked about this is when to call 911 or when not to call 911. If you have, hopefully none of you would be in this situation, but you're making decisions for somebody who has signed, who has expressed an interest in a DNR, who's had it, it's enough, just like, leave me alone. And the person stops breathing, or has clearly fluid on the lungs, can't breathe well, has a fall, and the person doesn't want to go to a hospital, doesn't want any more treatment, end stage 4 cancer. Do not call 911. It sounds terrible to say, but if you call 911, they are going to take your person to the hospital and treat. If the person doesn't want to be treated, you as the agent, don't call 911. What do? You're going to sit there and watch the person die and hold her hand and talk nicely, but that's what your person wanted. Your person didn't want to go back to the hospital yet again. So the healthcare proxy, the agent could be making decisions really way before death, if you're in the car accident, or you've suffered a stroke, but even if you're going to get better, or the very end of life decisions. So the gamut of the conversation is complicated and extensive, because it's, well, what if this, but what if the other thing, but what if, it's tough. I must tell a personal story. My mother is currently 94 and is suffering from congestive heart failure, and her brain is slowing down, and we've never had the conversation. And I'm her healthcare agent, and I'm making these decisions now because she's not processing enough. She's not even incompetent, but she can't process cause and effect anymore. And I'm going to have to start making these decisions by myself without her. And I never had the conversation. So I am so keenly aware of how important this is now, being sort of in the middle of it.
I'm going to throw in another thing. DNH, do not hospitalize. If your mother with dementia is in the nursing home and she gets a scratch on her head,
the aides call 911.
Not allowed.
I just want to recognize that we're at the top of the hour. So if anybody needs to leave, we can continue to talk for a couple of minutes. And I know Judy had a question, but I just don't want anyone to feel obligated if you need to leave.
Yes, unfortunately, I must go. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Pleasure that you could join us.
Right, and Andrea had another meeting she has to go to.
Okay.
Oh,
Judy, you have a question?
Judy, did you have a question though?
Yeah, you mentioned the power of attorney, which is not signed. When do you sign it?
Oh, power of attorney, you should sign now, today, because a power of attorney is a useful document. Even if you're competent and alive and healthy, you just might not be available to do your own business. You want to send your kid to the bank, or you want to have your kid come to a real estate closing for you. That a power of attorney is a good document for anybody to sign. And if you don't want your agent to actually start doing stuff, don't give him the piece of paper. Have your lawyer hold it. Don't put it in a safe deposit box. Safe deposit box, very bad place for anything. Wills, powers of attorney, healthcare.
Power of attorney to get into the safe deposit
That's
box.
right. But keep them someplace safe, but not the safe deposit box. But everybody should have a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy now.
Yeah.
And then change it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But do it soon. Well,
I was thinking, I did sign it, but I didn't give it. And I thought earlier you'd said, it is not signed.
oh, it's not give, I think it should be signed. I just wouldn't give it.
I either
The
didn't or I misunderstood.
I talk fast, sorry.
I also want to share that we will be sharing resources. I know, right, Heidi talked about the card game. There's also, and I'm sure this will be backwards when I share. Oh, no, it's not.
Very
5
good.
Wishes. We will share this website and you can get a document that asks you specific questions about in situations, would you want life support treatment? Do you not want life support treatment?
Right. They're
Just
wonderful.
to
That's a
prompt.
wonderful tool for facilitating the conversations with your agents.
And if you Google living wills, there are lots of different kinds and samples. There are Jehovah's Witnesses, Halakhic, Orthodox Jewish,
Right.
Catholic, secular. There's lots of different kinds of living wills that can give you different ideas about what you might want to put in. What is it? The Society for Death and Dying. No, it used to be called Death and Dying. Now it's called,
Choices.
I'm sorry?
Compassionate
called?
choices.
Used to be called the Society for Death and Dying, and then that's just too negative. So it's, can't think of the name of it now. But they also do one. But theirs, I don't like their healthcare proxy because it's got all the living will stuff in the same document. But if you just look at it for what kind of care you could might or might not want, it's a useful tool.
So we will include these links when I send out the email sometime before the end of this week.
Good.
I'm so glad. Does anyone have any questions before we close?
No question is silly. Just so you know that.
What's silly?
No question is silly. Sorry. Everything's useful.
Well,
I'm
thank
so
you
glad
so much.
You were all able to join us and
Thank you.
continue the conversation.
Be
Thank
well,
you.
everybody.
Have a good.
Right.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Right. Are we gonna, panelists, we're staying on for a
Thank
second?
you.
Hang on.
I have a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye, Danielle.
I'm going to hold on if you're talking still.
No, we're just going to
We're
talk
talking among ourselves.
All right, then I'll say thank you and I look forward to getting the
Bye, Elaine. No, Elaine didn't hang up.
Nope, and we lost Daniel, maybe.
No, he went. So I'm just going to say, even while Elaine might be listening, that was great presentation. I'm surprised when 20 people sign up and less than
8 people
half
show
show
up.
up. And I actually checked my email to see if people had written like, oh, I couldn't get, the link's not working, but no, nothing. So, oh, actually I should stop recording.